Hello and welcome to the first instalment of Politics Live, Upstart's live broadcast dedicated to bringing you the latest from the 2016 federal election. Over the next 4 weeks, we'll be providing running analysis of the campaign by recapping the news of the week and asking how the strategy of each party is playing out more broadly. I'm your host, Rudy Etzel. I'm joined by the Uni Poll Watch student editor, Matthew Almus.
Hi.
I've also got with me Naeem Kurt, Upstart Live's political correspondent.
It's a pleasure to be here, Rudy.
And
Thank
host
you so
today.
much.
Did a
I was
fantastic
host.
job on
Thank
the
you
last,
so much, mate.
last episode. How are we all, guys?
Good.
How are we enjoying the marathon election campaign so far?
Starting to snooze off, mate.
Yeah.
It's going too long.
Yeah, I've climbed out of my sick bed to be here, just like Michael Jordan, Game 5, 1997. So that's us. You know us now, sort of. We'll move on to what the politicians got up to this week. We've got the headlines. So week 3 of the official election campaign kicked off in the bellwether seat of Eden Monaro. It's on the south coast of New South Wales, where Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull dealt with a less than stellar news poll result. From there, the ABC stole the show with a Four Corners episode implicating all of Australia's major political players in questionable donation practices. Following the broadcast, MPs and candidates from all sides were questioned about their stance on political donations throughout the week. We'll have more on that later. Tuesday saw the Prime Minister move to Victoria, where he's pushed on budget costings, while Bill Shorten was forced to deal with the resignation of Indigenous Northern Territory Senator Nova Peris. The Coalition then moved to the tried and tested black hole strategy, with Turnbull and Treasurer Scott Morrison outlining a so-called $67 billion black hole in Labor's budget plans. We'll have a bit more on that later as well. The week moved to its halfway point, with Shorten trekking up to the Northern Territory, where he continued to be questioned on who will replace Senator Peris. And on the Coalition side, Barnaby Joyce is making headlines, announcing a loan package for dairy farmers struggling after Murray Goulburn slashed prices. Joyce remained on the front page the following morning after he linked Labor's live export bans to the influx of asylum seekers coming by boat from Indonesia. That put the Coalition into damage control on Thursday morning, with Turnbull denying the link. David Feeney saved the day for the Coalition, however, with a train wreck interview on Sky News that was topped off by reports that he left confidential documents outlining Labor's policy plan behind in the studio. And then, of course, today, as we reported earlier on Upstart Live, The Guardian broke the news that the government forced UNESCO to scrub any mention of Australia and the Great Barrier Reef from a major climate change report. So, pretty big week this week, it's fair to say. How'd you see it, Matt?
Yeah, well, I think this week we're definitely seeing the campaigns really starting to heat up. We've had a few weeks now where we're really getting into things. Funding announcements especially, they've really ramped up. We're seeing funding announcements throughout the week, although they have started to become drowned out by more controversial news. It seems the press is paying less attention to the funding announcements going on day to day, more attention to the various gaffes and problems that are going on for them during the campaign.
That's pretty standard for any election campaign, though, isn't it? There's always more focus on the gaffes than the policy.
Yeah, but I think what we're seeing with a much longer campaign this year is that the first couple of weeks came in with, it's a bit of a slower start-up. There are a lot less funding announcements. For a while, the Coalition was just continuously spruiking their budget, but that's kind of become old hat now, and they're moving on to other funding announcements. We saw the Prime Minister head off to Victoria. He made some announcements regarding Puffing Billy, which is just in the seat of Latrobe, not far from where we're broadcasting right now. And at the same time, Bill Shorten was off in WA, and he was announcing funding for transport infrastructure, and that's really continued throughout the week. So I think what we're really seeing this week is a start to what the official campaign would be in any other year.
Yeah, what are your thoughts, Naeem?
Yeah, it's been a interesting week. Matthew was talking about the focus on election promises, and there has been now the start of the real attack campaign as well. Earlier in the week, the Coalition came out and launched their budget attack on Labor, saying that there was a huge black hole there. I think it was a $67 billion black hole, which later, when under questioning from journalists, turned into a $32 billion black hole, which turned into a lesser and lesser black hole. And it really seemed that the Coalition became unstuck in their footing in what they were accusing Labor of, in having a black hole in their budget, and their own budgetary figures didn't add up either in their attack of Labor.
They muddled the message a bit, which is rare for a recent Coalition on budget stuff, I thought.
Yeah, and I think Labor took really full advantage of it, and they accused the government, saying this is the Treasurer leading the country. He can't even get the costings right in trying to attack us on a black hole. How can he manage a budget in full as well? And Labor really tried to capitalise on it.
What did you make of that, Matt?
Well, the media was definitely ready for this. I think we saw as soon as that $67 million figure came out, it was flip-flopping all over the place. And I think this black hole strategy has definitely been used in previous election campaigns, but this time the media came straight out of the gate. They were completely ready to shut down what Scott Morrison was saying. But despite that, they seem to have stuck with that messaging throughout the week, going through to the Treasurer's debate that happened this morning.
Is it surprising that the coalition would be trying to force the focus on the budget, Kurt?
I don't think it's surprising at all. The Turnbull camp has really been, their message this election has really been on jobs and the economy, whilst Labor has taken the other...
Jobs and growth.
Jobs and growth, that's been the spruik word of the election so far from them, and Labor has really been on concentrating on the essential services, things like Medicare, things like education, and that's been the contrast between both sides of the debate, and as is typical for both parties, the Liberals will say that you can't have welfare services like that without a strong economy, and Labor will say that we can't take everything out of welfare because then the economy, people will get caught without a safety net there to catch them. So it's the two ideologies playing out, really.
But I mean, this messaging from both sides was drowned out to quite a large extent, especially in the second half of the week. We had Barnaby Joyce coming out and making that link between nearly creating an international incident. It's probably fair to say.
That was deplorable, yes.
Yeah, and so after that point, the coalition was in damage control. They were in damage control throughout Thursday, and this morning they're to some extent are still in damage control, and that's really definitely taken them off message. Just
to reiterate, so Barnaby Joyce, he came out and he said that he basically linked the Labor's ban on live exports, and he basically said that Indonesia was sending refugees.
It was the catalyst for the
sending
arrival of 50,000. Yeah, 50,000.
He basically was accusing Indonesia of doing that out of a sense of vengeance, and he was given the chance to backtrack on that. Chris Ullman said, "Are you sure you're saying that?" And he doubled down on it, which I thought was pretty strange.
Well, yeah, it's, definitely when you're in that position as someone like Barnaby Joyce, though, you've kind of committed yourself. And I suppose the thinking at that moment in time is, well, if I backtrack now, I look really bad. And so, you double down. And, you could definitely see even in the talk in the debate that he was doing, he was trying to be a little bit careful with his language, but obviously that was a complete failure for him, as the last 36 hours for the coalition have just been questions on this all the time, over and over.
It's something that we're very used to, though, with Barnaby Joyce. He is someone that has been described in the media before as someone who shoots from the lip rather than someone who shoots from the hip, and he often fires away with crazy statements. We've seen it all with Johnny Depp and the whole dog saga, and he got a bit of airtime with that this week, a bit of boost to his campaign. Probably not what he was hoping for, where Johnny Depp appeared on American TV. I think they likened him to the appearance of a tomato.
I think, they said he looked like he was inbred with a tomato. I thought that was interesting, the way he handled that compared to the way he's handled the live export thing, because he actually rode that pretty well. I thought he came out and he made some gag and sort of rode with it, and then the next day made the gaffe about Indonesia, and it's kind of, there's the two sides of Barnaby Joyce. Like sometimes he's pretty good at taking a gag, and then other times he's saying just really weird things that are going to cause an international incident.
But at the same time, I mean, we can't forget David Feeney either. He came in at the end of the week and kind of, so it's fair to say, kind of saved the day for the coalition a little bit. He had that.
I think he's taken the award there of the biggest gaffe of the campaign so far,
well,
and probably a couple of them at least.
Yeah, definitely. And, to a big extent, the ABC characterised it as a train wreck interview, and I definitely think that's fair. What was extremely interesting was that the media coverage around that immediately switched. As soon as David Feeney did that interview, the next morning we had the Daily Telly coming out with that the revelations that he left the documents behind. And, if you were Malcolm Turnbull at that point, you would just be saying, thank
God.
Thank God that, this Barnaby Joyce thing isn't going to be as bad as it was, because there was a little bit of media attention being diverted. But even then, I mean, they've now got this UNESCO thing this morning. It's definitely going to be a bad day for the coalition.
Yeah, definitely. We will talk about Feeney a little bit later. We're going to have a bit of a closer look at Batman, which he calls Batman, and that kind of annoys me. Just call it Batman. Come on, be cool. But I wanted to talk about Four Corners Monday night. Now that's sort of hung around all of the entire political zeitgeist, I guess, since it's aired on Monday, and it's really sort of shaken everyone up, Matt.
Yeah, so it's kind of been that thing that dropped on Monday and just has continued to make waves throughout the week. I mean, we've seen every politician, every MP, every candidate that's had a media appearance this week has really been asked about what they think about campaign finance reform. We saw Lionhelm weigh in on Sky News saying that, he thinks people should be allowed to donate to whatever party they want as long as it's completely transparent and it's done quickly. We saw Arthur Sinodinos come out, I think it was yesterday, and say that, or the day before, and say that, he was going to be an advocate for campaign finance reform. And that was probably one of the most interesting ones because obviously he was at the centre of a lot of those revelations that were coming out in the Four Corners piece.
Yeah, so let's just reiterate exactly what's happened. So the actual thrust of the Four Corners program was that the state New South Wales Liberal Party has been taking campaign donations from the construction industry, but funneled through a separate entity. That's right.
Yeah, and what was interesting about the report is that it really wasn't just focused on the Liberal Party as well. There were parts of the report that touched on the Labor Party and how they've reacted to or how they've behaved with campaign financing, and even the Greens as well. And there was a large part of the report on a petrol scandal as well, or I think ethanol, not a scandal, but ethanol legislation as well, and how campaign finance played a role in that part of the political process. And so it's really something that all the big political players have been implicated in, and as a result it's really been the media driving this discussion, because no politician can win points on doing it because they were involved in it to some extent.
All hands are dirty, I think.
Yeah, all hands are dirty.
Yeah, I find that interesting when the entirety of the political class just closes ranks on an issue like this, with the media trying to pry it open. It's fascinating to watch, and I don't think this will be the last we've heard of that. Nick Xenophon is even having trouble with this.
That was interesting as well. That kind of broke a little bit later on and was a continuation. I know Sky pushed this pretty hard. They were talking about Xenophon, who came out with news came out that there was a $170,000 donation made to his campaign by businessman Ian Melrose, and that was definitely surprising given comments that Xenophon has made in previous years. I think it was something like 6 years ago that where he said that if somebody donates $1,000 to your campaign, they're a supporter, but if they donate $100,000 to your campaign, they own you. And so the question at this point is, does Ian Melrose own Nick Xenophon? And aside from that, when questioned on the donation, he said that it was more like a loan than a donation, which has landed him in hot water with the AEC, as I understand.
A loan?
Yeah, and of course with the AEC, you can't be loaning. I think probably loaning a politician money is probably worse than donating it to him, because then you're in debt to him and you have to pay it back somehow. So I'm not sure he made his situation any better, but there is a nefarious side to this too. It all takes me back to about 10 or 12 years ago. I remember when Tony Abbott had his own with this political donation thing. He had his own business there, and they used that. Big business was donating into that, and he used that as a fund to launch a legal campaign against One Nation, which is what
the slush funds,
slush funds. And so there is a history of politicians using these slush funds in quite nefarious ways as well to take down other political opponents, and it's happened before in the past with Liberals taking on the WA Democrats and leading them in circles and legal challenges about their names. So it's a lot more can come from this.
Definitely. And I think what's going to be interesting is, because of the media is driving this discussion on campaign finance, is that we're going to see it continue to pop up where their vulnerabilities emerge. And one of the themes we're seeing this election year is that candidates are being grilled a lot more as well. And I was on the show earlier talking about David Mullahan, the Liberal candidate for Jagger, and his response to a question by one of our Unipolrox reporters on the fact that he says he doesn't have time to deal with campaign finance transparency. And it's going to be really interesting in the coming weeks to see what the media dredges up from candidates and how they feel about these things, because obviously they're usually a bit more loose-lipped than MPs and frontbenchers. So
I'm wondering if there's a solution to it all. Do we think that capping finances, how much people can donate to a political party as possible. I know they suggest in the Four Corners report that maybe capping it at $500 and forcing politicians to have sausage sizzles and to raise all of their funds, which a lot of politicians probably roll their eyes at. It. They can't raise the big money, but this person who was speaking on Four Corners said that...
Maybe that's the plan to stop them from raising massive money.
Yeah, it might actually be a benefit for democracy.
Well, speaking of finance, that's the black hole, the financial black hole that we mentioned off the top, has been a pretty big topic this week, and it's sort of been an elastic black hole. So the coalition have really smashed Labor for this I can't stop saying black hole, but this black hole in their costings.
Yeah, well, this is really interesting because I'd see this more as a strategy. You know, we've seen this in other elections. This is Operation Black Hole. This is coming around, attacking, you know, the opposing party, and Labor have done this to all previous elections. This definitely gets around, saying that if essentially the other party can't fund the promises that they're putting out. We had Scott Morrison coming out as early as today in the Treasurer's debate and saying that, hey, there's a difference between costing and funding. But I think Scott Morrison hasn't scored as many points this week with his Operation Black Hole as perhaps he thought he would. The media have been pretty quick to question him on quite a few things, as well as the fact that the foreign aid program that he was criticising Labor over was actually a bipartisan commitment. And so the idea that his party was actually committed to funding that program as well, and that opened up questions about whether the Liberal Party can fund their own budget.
This attack, though, on Labor and their black hole, it's really forced Labor to come clean and reassess some of its funding promises. We saw that with the school bonus, which was David Feeney was questioned. I think we'll cover that later, but Labor came out later on, and even though they'd said in the past that they were behind working class families in opposing the removal of the school bonus, that in fact they probably can't fund it now, and it put the pressure on them to make a firm decision either way on some of these issues, which they hadn't done previously.
Yeah, and I think kind of there's definitely a stark difference here between the strategy of the coalition and the strategy of Labor in regards to dealing with these kind of issues. Labor seemed, after Bill Shorten's come into the leadership of the party, it seemed to be a lot more willing to bite the bullet on things like this and come out and say, no, sorry, we can't do it, or these are things we have to backtrack on, or sorry, we've made a mistake. They've come forward in regards to climate change and asylum seekers. Anthony Albanese on Q&A on Monday night said that he got it wrong on asylum seekers, and we've had Mark Butler come out in previous weeks and say that they got it wrong on climate change and the carbon tax as well. So I think we're seeing a strategy from Labor where they're saying, look, if we own it, the coalition can't attack it.
Do you think that translates to the electorate? Do you think people in the electorate will be happy with Labor that they're admitting that they're human and sometimes they make mistakes, or does it look bad that a party's not invincible and that they are making so many errors?
Well, it's certainly seen the coalition react a bit differently. The coalition doesn't seem to be pressing Labor as hard on those areas where they're coming out and admitting their mistakes, and that's certainly very interesting. But this is definitely a planned out strategy from Labor that they're going to be willing to bite the bullet on some things.
I'd imagine there probably would have been some polling done amongst their focus groups to see if that's an issue that translates or not.
Certainly.
Yeah, you're probably right. On the subject of Labor, the Nova Peris resignation has thrown a bit of a spanner in the works.
Yeah, to say the least. I think it's one of those things that wasn't necessarily a very negative issue for Bill Shorten, but it was certainly something that I don't think he was planning on coming into the week. It's come up. He trekked up to Northern Territory. I'm not sure whether that was planned or not, or whether he made the decision after Nova Peris came out and said she was going to not recontest. But he had to go up there, and it took time away from his message, and the media really went fairly hard on Nova Peris over the last couple of days.
We should talk about the significance of it too, because Nova Peris is, of course, one of two senators up in the Northern Territory. So each territory in Australia only has two senators that are committed to the federal parliament in the Senate, and rather than the 12 or so which is committed to each state. Now, one of those is held by the Country Liberal Party. The other one was held by the Labor Party and was held by a long-serving member before 2013, and she was actually replaced and taken off the top spot under Julia Gillard at the last election 2013 election, or 2 elections ago rather, and was replaced with Nova Peris, who of course is a famous Australian athlete. I think was the first Indigenous person to win gold and in the athletics, and she was a really big one of these big star candidates that Labor loves to pull into the party. People like we've seen people like Peter Garrett pull in as well as star candidates.
Pat Dodson as well.
Maxine McHugh, Pat Dodson more recently, and it really brings the question on whether that was the right decision. Whether a captain's call from a politician is right, or should it be left to the electorate and the Labor members in NT to choose which senator gets to lead them?
Yeah, and that's certainly been something that's dogged Bill Shorten a little bit now that we're having the prospect of picking a new candidate, and obviously that's a safe ticket up in Northern Territory for the Labor Party. And the question is now, will it be another captain's pick, or will it be up to the Northern Territory branch of the Labor Party? And the other question that's been floating around in the media is, are we going to see another Indigenous person representing the Northern Territory in the Senate? And so those are definitely questions that Bill Shorten is going to have to deal with in the media in the coming days. And it's certainly a little bit further off message than I think he would have liked to be.
Yes, those are all things we'll find out soon. We've got a guest on the line now. And in the election cycle, the media obviously plays a pretty crucial role in disseminating the news and announcements, and part of that machine, an invaluable part of that machine, political cartoonists. And we have veteran cartoonist Rocco Fazzari on the line now. He's worked for Fairfax for 30 years with Sydney Morning Herald and the Canberra Times.
Rocco, welcome to the show.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Rocco, I guess the question is, how does someone like yourself become involved in becoming a political cartoonist? What was it that inspired you to get involved in political cartooning?
Well, I like the spontaneity of producing work that would, you got a direct response from, greater than a piece of work hanging in a gallery or just sharing with your friends. This is way before social media, and the intimate nature of it all and sharing it with your readers was a great way of getting across ideas. And I know I really wanted to get involved with things that would help. Well, I know this sounds idealistic, helping to change the world. Yep.
Political cartoonists, they have a way of satirising politics and telling a story that you just can't do in words. How have you seen the industry change over the past 20 years or so, or even the past 5 or 10 years?
Okay, well, 20 years ago, newspapers became a whole lot more visual. The layouts and designs lean towards the visual part of it. And as you know, a picture paints 1,000 words, but a cartoon can paint 1,000,000 words. There are a lot of things you can say in a cartoon that, you can't say in words and you can get away with. For instance, you can't say, Tony's got big ears, but you can draw it and you get away with it. But in the last few years, what's changed is that we have a lot of the citizen cartoonists come on board creating memes and GIFs that they put out in social media. And some of them are really very good, and of course they're free, and that kind of upsets the balance of the professional cartoonist.
So with the arrival of memes and GIFs, does that put pressure on political cartoonists? Do you think there's room for them in the modern media going forward?
I think there is, but they will have to adapt. Traditionally, a cartoonist would do his work in the evening, and it would appear in the morning in a paper. That's no longer a viable business model for cartoonists, if you want to put it that way. They need to actually move a lot faster than that, because the news cycle moves a whole lot faster than that. I mean, they might have to somehow invent a hybrid cartoon between a GIF and a traditional one. I think there is a space, but people have to adapt and change to it.
You've worked for Fairfax Media now for 30 years. What's the situation going on at Fairfax at the moment? Where are political cartoonists being ranked in their employment structure? We know there's been cuts, of course, into Fairfax, and how's that affecting the political cartoonists?
I think a few of them are, of course, justifiably anxious about it. I don't know what the company's stand on that is. I do think that they probably think that political cartooning is something of the past, and it's something that they can't adapt to. And video is the go, and big splashy pictures and that. So yeah, I think most of them are feeling a little bit uneasy. I mean, considering that you're hearing stories that a lot of newspapers will be shutting down soon.
Thanks for that, Rocco. It was a revealing look at the way cartoonists shape the election. Sorry, I've run out of words.
Okay.
Cool. All right, it's 20:23 here at Politics Live. You're listening to Rudy Etzel. I'm with Matt Elmas and Noam Kurt. All right, so we're going to move on to Batman Watch now. This might be a weekly thing, it might not, but it's been very much in the news this week, Matt.
Yeah, Batman's obviously extremely interesting electorate. I feel like I talk about Batman a lot, but it's certainly interesting enough to warrant the amount of discussion that goes into it. We've seen Alex Batal this week team up with Lee Rhiannon to announce a policy platform for animal welfare. They were out in the electorate on Wednesday night, spruiking that. They had a lot of interesting things to say. But I guess the person that really stole the show this week for Batman was David Feeney, and I don't think we can leave that alone. I think we've got a video here that we can show so everyone can see exactly what we mean when we talk about David Feeney.
What about why you didn't actually declare it for nearly 3 years on the Register of Members' Interests?
Human error, just simply a failure.
Do you accept a lot of people would find that hard to swallow, that you could forget about declaring? You meant to declare all your investments, a $2.3 million property investment?
Well, I guess I'd make the point that when people forget to register their car, they don't forget they have a car. I never forgot I had a home, but my failure, and there's no walking away from it, it was a failure, was to register the house on the Register of Interests. Now, there's no suggestion there was a conflict of interest. There's no suggestion that I profited from it. All that mistake on my part created was 3 days of humiliation for me. Now, that's fair cop. I wear it. It's the fruit of my own mistake, but that's all it was.
And do you accept it also has been the biggest own goal of Labor's campaign so far?
I think, unfortunately, that is a trophy I managed to secure last week.
Been described as a bit of a train wreck, that one, Matt. What do you reckon?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that certainly wasn't good news for David Feeney. We are seeing a little bit of that bite the bullet strategy there, him coming out and saying, yes, it was, I did make a mistake, and unfortunately, I have taken a bit of a trophy for the worst screw-up so far. But unfortunately, the bad day didn't stop there for David Feeney. The Daily Telegraph reporting the next morning that he actually left confidential talking points behind after the interview. So, yeah, that's a bit of a worry for Feeney there in Batman.
Yeah, it's fair to say he's had a bit of a stinker, and it's going to be one of the more hotly contested seats this election too, with the Greens gaining ground. Not quite the worst of the week though. In our eyes, we're gonna be giving out what we call the Dutton of the week for the worst gaffe, and it's a long campaign, so there'll be plenty of them. But this week, the award goes to Matthias Cormann for this stuff up.
Bill Shorten is very caring and very much in touch, and Bill Shorten every single day is promoting our National Economic Plan for Jobs and Growth, which is of course exactly what Australia needs, given the continued global economic headwinds.
So, not his best moment there. He's dishing out some lavish praise to the opposition leader.
Yeah, no, I think Bill Shorten came out after that and said, look, it's just more evidence that people from the Liberal Party are supporting their own policies. So, yeah, I think, if anything, that's kind of Matthias Cormann. They're making a little bit of a mistake, but he does do one of those press conferences every day at 8:30. He's kind of filling that role of the person that stays in Canberra and kind of frames the day for Turnbull before he does his press conferences later, and perhaps deals with any of the froth off the top that Turnbull perhaps wants to palm off to somebody else and doesn't want to distract him during the day. Yeah,
he's played quite an important role, I feel. That'll pretty much do us for Politics Live for this week. We'll see you back here next week. We've got Kurt for Naim, I should say, for one more week before he jets off to Europe, the lucky guy. And Matt, of course, is a political Trojan, so he'll be here week in, week out. He's the heart and soul of politics here at Upstart, it's fair to say. My name's been Rudy Etzel, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good job, Sweet. That was good.
Intense.